Thank you for coming. My name is Jason Louv. I'm talking about Magick with a K. So if you're like, if you don't want to like deal with that, now would be the time to leave. Otherwise, I have your consent, so just bear that in mind. So, I run a blog called Ultra Culture, and I've written and edited 5 books, starting with Generation Hex, which came out 5-6 years ago, maybe more than that, which was an introduction to the occult, magic, shamanism, anarchy, deviant sex, drugs, and everything else that we know and love. I followed that up with another book called Ultra Culture, and I edited the Psychic Bible with Genesis Briar Peorage from Psychic TV and Throbbing Gristle. Right now I'm running the website, which is hopefully, I'm attempting to pierce the veil, as it were, of the mainstream media and bring out information on what's really going on in the world. That includes magic, but also includes a lot of the political ill dealings that we have in the world right now. But the talk tonight is about magic, and I wasted my 20s running around all over the world trying to learn magic, the esoteric, the occult, from as many different cultures as I could, including not only the Western magical tradition, which is what I'll be talking about tonight, but Nepali indigenous shamanism, Indian tantra, Sufism from Turkey, Freemasonry, and probably a bunch of other stuff I'm forgetting, chaos magic. At the end of that, I had to pick myself up and put myself together and figure out what I wanted to pass on from all that. So hopefully tonight I can pass on some of that to you and share my fucked up worldview with you. So let's talk about magic. And let's try and leave as much of the nonsense out of it as we can, because there is a lot of nonsense, obfuscation, bullshit, and trickery within the occult. When you get down to it, it's not that complicated. So I want to give you the basics. Please store up questions, because I'm really good with questions, and I'll answer them at the end, and feel free to ask whatever you want. So, magic, briefly, is the first belief system of humanity, and it will be the last. Magic is mankind's natural way in the world. Underneath the social conditioning, the bullshit, the stuff we have to put up with in the day-to-day life, underneath all the layers that religion has put on top of human consciousness, that purely materialistic science has put on top of human consciousness, that advertising, that politics, that just being alive in a socially conformist world does to us. Magic is our natural state underneath all of that. Underneath that bullshit ideology, we're innately whole beings, innately magical beings. And to rest in stillness with a clear mind, free from conditioning, is to be at one with stillness, to be at one with magic, at one with the universe, simultaneously connected with your inherent divinity and with the cosmos. That's what it's about. But we don't do this. Instead, we distract ourselves. We watch Breaking Bad. We watch. We stay on Reddit all day. We stay on Facebook all day. We distract ourselves with jobs, relationships, addictions, whatever it is. We all have them, and we forget who we really are. But underneath the pavement, as the situation is said, is the beach, and underneath the noise is magic, our true state. Magic is the innate ability of every human being to connect to the universe, or other worlds if need be. Nobody can sell it to you, and nobody can take it away from you. It's your birthright, and it's yours to develop if you choose. To be a magical being is, at least for short periods of time, to learn to drop the boundary between yourself and the wider universe. It's to remember that you are never separate from the universe at all, that in fact it's your larger being. You're not alone. There's a lot of paths to that. You can study magic out of books, you can look it up on the internet, you can go join a cult. I'm sure there's lots around here who would love to have you join. You can follow the instructions, step by step. People have been writing this down for thousands of years, and many cultures have kept it alive as a living tradition. And you can do that. A lot of people come to magic for different reasons. A lot of people come to magic for selfish reasons. Maybe you get into magic because you feel powerless, or alone, or afraid. Or you feel like you're not getting what you want from the universe. Maybe you do a little bit of sorcery here and there to get money, to get a job, to get a new relationship, to get that man back. Maybe it works. But pretty soon, if you start on this path, you start to see where it leads. And it's not about getting stuff. It's not about getting stuff done. When you throw yourself fully into the magical current, and it is a living, breathing tradition and a current that flows through reality, that will pick you up and drag you somewhere that you never expected. When you do that, you realize that magic does exactly one thing only, and that is utterly destroy you. Rather than making your wildest dreams come true, it shows you that you're dreaming. It shocks you awake. And in the end, there will be nothing left of the person that you thought you were at all. Just a pile of dust. Instead of bringing you trinkets and shiny things from the universe, it will completely dissolve the boundary between you and the universe. And show you that it's you. And that's where the real fun begins. So, it's not about being a magician, whatever that means. It's not about being special and different and weird and collecting all the cool jewelry and so on and so forth. It's about completely throwing yourself into the magic of reality that's there, right in front of you. It's not a supernatural thing. It's not like a something that you think is gonna. It's not gonna change. Nothing's gonna change about reality except your approach to it. When you throw yourself into the current, into the magical current, into the world, then you get to see what happens. We're magical beings alive in a magical universe, and more, at least for me, I find that the world can't be explained by anything except magic. Science tells us the how, and it's our best tool for shining light into the darkness and figuring out what the fuck is going on in the universe and the laws of nature and the laws of matter. But it cannot explain meaning. It can't explain emotions. It can't explain interpersonal things. It can't explain why we're here. And religion can't either, because religion is lies that's been layered on top of humanity as control systems. So where do we go from that? The answer is magic. Just because priests turn out to be child molesters, does that mean that there's no such thing as divinity and spirit? Just because we've had an abusive relationship, in this case with religion and its petty dictators, does that mean that there's no such thing as higher reality? No, of course not. The question is, what's our tool? We need a tool as precise as science, a system of experimentation that will allow us to understand the world of spirit just as precisely and without deception as we now understand physics, for instance. And not just take it on faith. Experiment, figure it out, understand it on our own terms, make truth for ourselves, understand, experiment, right? Magic, not blind faith. So beneath all the bullshit, the new age stuff, the cheap satanic shit, the counterculture carny nonsense, is the secret spiritual tradition of the West, I think. It's a path that has been kept alive in secret for centuries, at least since the Renaissance, and before that. It's a path that's valid and complex, and even more so than Tibetan Buddhism or Vedanta are in the East. So here's my contention, right? We're standing here, we're alive, this is the greatest moment in history. We are as gods, and we're learning to act like it. Our gadgetry, our technological wizardry, makes us more than human. We can instantly telepathically communicate with everyone in the world at any point in history. Explain that in any other way except magic. If you look at a grimoire from 100 years ago, they'll be talking about that, but we can do it now. We can instantly have anything brought to our door as if by magic. So the question is, why is magic so popular now? When I started out writing, I knew maybe 4 people who were into this, right? There was Genesis Peerage, There were a couple people I knew in Orange County, and that was about it. And now it's everywhere. Why is it that every band has occult iconography? Why is it that you can see it everywhere you go, and especially in this town, right? Why is it everywhere all of a sudden? It could be an Illuminati MK Ultra mind experiment to fuck with hipsters. It's possible. I mean, I don't have anything to do with that if that is. Or is there something deeper going on? So it's my belief, drawn from experience, that we're on the verge of the biggest magical renaissance in history. And I think the people in this room are early adopters, right? Why is everybody suddenly interested in the occult, in psychic abilities, in spirituality, in weird shit? Why? I believe that what we're looking at in this room is a completely new type of human being. And that you damn occult kids are the precursors of a new way of thinking that's going to be much, much more prevalent in the world in the future. This would be ground zero for it. It's big in New York now also, from what I hear, but I see it everywhere here because I'm here. Madame Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society in the late 19th century, which was probably the total foundation of the New Age, believed that a new race of human beings would be born on the West Coast at the beginning of the 20th century. I'm not making this up. And then they would congregate on the coast of California. Okay. So, that's my contention. People have been telling us we're on the verge of this for a long time, and 2012 wasn't real, but it kind of was, because look at, I mean, just to have this conversation in this room, I can't see any other time before this where this has been possible. I've been trying for years, but now you're all here, this is happening, this is great. So how did we get here? In order to answer that question, in order to understand what magic in the 21st century is and how it's different from what came before, we need to understand where we've been. We need to understand the superstitious beliefs that humanity has been through, because there's a lot of what passes for magic which is just superstition. We need to understand that, and we need to separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were. So to answer that question, we need to go back to prehistory, to humanity's first steps in the world. We need to understand what magic was originally and why we lost it. Why we ended up in a materialistic, scientific world in which we were divorced and cut off from the world of spirit. Why? Why did this happen? In the beginning, when mankind was born out of Africa, magic was our first way, right? Like a 7-year-old child who lives in a world of superstition and totems and synchronicities and coincidences and meaningful signs, so were we. Mankind dwelled in a world of totem and taboo, in which we were not separate from nature at all. It was during this time, before agriculture, that humanity dwelled in a completely magical reality. The Bible refers to this period as the Garden of Eden, as a metaphor, as the pre-fall state of Adam and Eve. In the psychohistorical model of the Golden Dawn, which was the magical society in late 19th century Victorian England, of which W.B. Yeats was a member, and whose most controversial member was Aleister Crowley, they called this period of human development the Aeon of Isis. Isis is the great matriarch, the great mother goddess of Egypt, the archetypal feminine. Because it was at this time that, not yet having understood how sex works, we believed that women just spontaneously became pregnant and gave birth. Therefore, we saw women as uniquely divine, and we worshiped the goddess as the source of all life and magic, as women were believed to uniquely have power over life and death. Therefore, they were the image of God. Humanity was at this point matriarchal. As we see from the Paleolithic sculptures that have been unearthed from all across the world, if you follow archaeology, figures of women, like basically giant women, were unearthed from all around the world at this time. This was the archetypal goddess figure. And we worshipped it. We worshipped the spirits of nature. We worshipped the spirits of fertility, because those were the forces that defined our world. The late psychedelic theorist Terence McKenna, in the book Food of the Gods, suggests that at this time mankind was engaged in the consistent, unceasing use of psilocybin mushrooms. easily harvested, which I don't know anything about. So, sexuality for prehistoric man, McKenna suggests, was a never-ending psychedelic orgy, right? That's Eden. Sex was tribal and communal and regularly conducted in the psychedelic space. In this time, we were more immersed in the spirit world, with no distinction between this world and the next, between waking world and the dream time, as it were, as the Aboriginals call it. Lines had not yet been drawn between men and women. Mankind was in a period of history that goddess-based spirituality, the ecological movement, and many forms of New Age and shamanic beliefs suggest we return to. But I hate to break it to you, it's not happening. It's never coming back, and it might not have been that great in the first place. However, it's from this period of history that we inherit the most basic primal forms of magic. Shamanism, both psychedelic and otherwise, dominated this period as mankind attempted to make sense of its world through shamanic intermediaries that could explain existence. They were getting high constantly and bringing that information in, and that's where we get our culture from. It was these beliefs that would survive into later periods of history as underground traditions like Tantra and witchcraft, in which psychedelic sexuality and magic are still practiced, but in secret, for reasons that I'll get into in a second. So we had it kind of good for a while, but this setup changed when a few things happened, as McKenna suggests. Droughts came through the world, and that made food and psychedelic mushrooms much less plentiful, which sucks. You can at least do without food, right? The fall from Eden. We were forced, in the Bible, it says that mankind was forced east of Eden by an angel with a flaming sword, in reference to a drought, perhaps. We were forced to look for ways to preserve and store our goods. So at this time, mankind made a few important discoveries. The first was that seeds could be transported, because all of a sudden we couldn't get food from the environment, so we had to figure out how to farm. If the world was in a state of drought, then people had better start practicing planting crops so that there would be food for later. So agriculture was born, and with it, the concept of ownership. Instead of randomly picking sustenance from the wilderness, crops could now be grown and therefore owned and even hoarded. Men were no longer equal because some had access to farmed crops and some didn't. Along with the realization that planting seeds could grow crops came a parallel realization that the process worked exactly the same way with human beings. Suddenly, when we started planting crops, we realized that babies just didn't come from women randomly. They were planted in women by men. So if men could now own planted crops, the mindset extended, they could now own women, right? The balance of power shifted. Now we weren't a feminine society anymore. We weren't a matriarchal society. We were now an agriculture-based ownership society where nature and women could be owned. Agriculture, ownership, and patriarchy were born instantly, side by side. As far as the psychedelic mushrooms went, those had to be preserved and saved as well, because they would have been quickly disappearing from the wild and drought conditions. The easiest way to store psychedelic mushrooms, which I don't know if any of you know, is to put them in honey, right? If you stick mushrooms in honey, they're preserved essentially for indefinitely. And also the honey starts to become psychedelic, right? Which is great. However, if you fuck it up and air gets into it, the honey starts to ferment. Now you've got alcohol, right? This is how mankind discovers booze, which is psychedelic at first because it's mixed with mushrooms. So now everyone's drunk. And I don't know if anyone has ever been to Burning Man after like after like a week at Burning Man where everybody's been tripping constantly, and then all of a sudden all the drunk townies show up. Anyone had that experience? Okay. Yeah, it's a little jarring. So now you've got alcohol. And with the discovery of alcohol, mankind was in for a very rough time indeed. And all of these collective events put together created the fall from Eden. So it was at this time that a wholly new epoch in human consciousness was born. We were not shamanistic anymore. We were not matriarchal anymore. Now we were patriarchal, and now the image of the divine became not the mother goddess, but the father god. Since men were now thought to have the sole power to create life and to plant crops, we now began to worship the male secrets of agriculture and growth. And bear in mind that even up until the 1920s, people still thought that men just randomly planted babies and women. Till the 20s, people didn't understand how conception worked. So we began to worship male gods. And not just male gods, but male gods who prefigured the cycle of agriculture, who were born and then died and were reborn just like the crops. Aleister Crowley called this period of history the Aeon of Osiris, because Osiris is the archetypal Egyptian hero king that dies and is reborn, just like the crops, just like wheat, just like the sun every night. Because mankind believed that the sun died every night and was resurrected. The Egyptian Book of the Dead connects all of these metaphors together and includes along with them the hidden meaning of the death and resurrection of the soul. So this is where we get Jesus from, right? Jesus is an agriculture, solar deity who contains within him the mysteries of solar regeneration, rebirth, and agriculture and patriarchy. He dies and is reborn just like the crops, just like every other hero king who fit the same bill that was spread throughout the ancient world at that time. Just like every hero in every movie still that follows the basic Hollywood plot. So as kings drew their economic sustenance from agriculture, they began to derive their divine right to rule from fathers, solar gods. So it's at this time that we begin to see phallic symbols, monuments, obelisks, skyscrapers now, right? All over the world, just like we saw fertility goddesses before. Now there's male symbols everywhere, all over the world, throughout cultures. It's not just Western culture. So consider Christ, and consider similarly how much the agricultural metaphor spreads throughout the religions of the ancient world. The Kabbalistic tree of life, right? The Bodhi tree that the Buddha attains enlightenment under. Vegetation, agriculture, these were the forces that ruled our world. Consider the spread of slavery, the obsession with property that extended even into owning human beings. And most of all, consider the terrifying spread of monotheism, with its single, all-seeing, persecuting God, and its threats of eternal damnation for sexual transgression. Why? Because sexuality was related to ownership now, and people had to be threatened. It's that simple. What is this but ruling elites imposing their will upon a populace that they were now farming, just like their agricultural crops? But the era of patriarchy is over, and it will be not replaced by matriarchy. We're not going back to nature. We're not going back to the womb. We're now in the age of the child, and we're going to the stars. So here's where we really get into the fun stuff. And this is where we leave behind all of the old stuff. All that old magic crap. Forget it. Forget it. Leave it behind with all the superstitious crap of matriarchy, matriarchal prehistory, and all the hopeless enslavement of the patriarchal dark ages. Everything we usually think of as magic, spells, curses, hexes, Wicca, archaic shamanism, religious ritual, the church, all that shit, that's all old Aeon magic. And it's all Ren Fair shit at this point. It's beautiful in its own way, right? It's beautiful. But it's simply not applicable to the modern world. It will not get you from point A to point B in this time. People who still engage in the old systems of magic are historical reenactors. And it's great. But we're in a different era. It's embarrassing for a reason, right? We're not talking about Firuza Balk and the craft here. God bless her, right? We're going to talk about the real shit. So, question is, where are we now? What is the new Aeon, as Crowley called it? Despite the extent to which people like to bag on Aleister Crowley in order to prop up their own moral superiority, He was one of the greatest, if not the greatest magicians in the 20th century, despite his personal failings. And according to him, we have now made the transition into a third age, in which we're dominated not by the image of the mother, not by the image of the father, but by the ever-borning child. Yeah. Crowley called this period the Aeon of Horus, right? Because Horus is the Egyptian child god who manifests as force and fire to destroy everything that's come before. If you've ever spent time around a 2-year-old, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Constant tantrums, constant destruction, constantly having it its way. That's the image of God now. Horus is the hawk-headed lord of the horizon. Horus is the glyph of humanity waking up to its own divine nature, without mother goddesses or father gods. Horus manifests as mankind understanding, finally, that we're not created by a man or a woman, but by both. And that therefore we're not only a mixture of both, but we're our own beings, divine syntheses. And that we can make our own destiny instead of stay the property of other beings. No more slave gods. Horus manifests as mankind realizing that the sun doesn't die when it falls over the horizon, but that the earth is revolving around the sun constantly. And that similarly, the soul does not die with the body, but returns eternally, which takes quite a bit of stress out of life. Horus manifests as 2 world wars, utterly destroying the old world order in force and fire. Horus manifests as the nuclear bomb, splitting the atom that is as sure a symbol of monotheism as any, and shattering the world forever. 0 equals 2, let they who have ears to hear, hear. Horus manifests as women's liberation, as gay liberation, as racial liberation, as liberation period. Horus manifests as birth control, as women becoming girt with the sword, as it were, and taking control of their own destinies. Horus manifests as the old religions competing to see who can destroy each other fastest, struggling to maintain the very last vestiges of power as they disintegrate into irrelevance. Horus manifests as the tendency for both genders to blur together, as the slow erasing of gender distinctions and the increasing prevalence of androgyny, bisexuality, pansexuality, and as Genesis Friar George puts it, pandrogyny. Horus manifests as the tendency of the young to completely reject the dogmas of the world and demand proof on their own terms of the laws of reality. Horus manifests as the mass obsession with magic, with the New Age, with occult powers, and everything in between. Horus manifests as an update of the old magic. Instead of fairies and shadow courts, now we have aliens and government conspiracies. Horus manifests as the dictum, every man and woman is a star, and the Hollywood star system was only a prototyping for our current reality, no longer needed. Now everyone's a star on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, chattering forever into the universe, every individual the center of their own universe, every man and woman a star, ever-borning child. Horus manifests as the complete and utter destruction of the sin complex, and the realization that the gates of heaven are within our own being, far more easily accessed by sex, drugs, and rock and roll than in a church pew. In the Aeon of Horus, the old image of the divine as either a comforting earth mother or a scolding sky father is completely overturned because we have been kicked out of the nest. It's time to grow up. Now what you might call God or the divine or spirit takes 3 forms. It takes the form of the conscious universe, which we're all in. It takes the form of our inner divinity, and it takes the form of us, right? Us, these bratty, selfish, fucked up children with more electronic powers than even the most powerful of the old gods were attributed to having by a supernatural means. We are the face of God. We, us, self-aware humanity. We're what the early Christian writers called the Beast 666, the Antichrist, us, because we no longer placed divine agency in external beings but have claimed it for ourselves. For the early Christians, this was the apocalypse, the apocalypsis. But it isn't the end of the world. It's only the end of the old Aeon and the revelation that we are as gods. Astrologically, for those who are hip to that, the Aeon of Horus is attributed to the signs of Aquarius and Leo. Aquarius, symbolizing the constant flow of information in our electronic age. Leo, symbolizing the lion-like nature of mankind's self-realization, and also the attendant egoism and self-obsession. It's a recipe for social media, if I've ever heard one. The Hindu sage, similarly, the Hindu sage Sri Yukteswar, referred to this period of history as the Dvapara Yuga, in which mankind has begun to exit the dark ages of the Kali Yuga, and begun to demand realization on its own terms, with all the attendant magical powers of technology following right behind. This Aeon will last for 2,000 years. It started in 1904 and will last 2,000 years. So, okay. So ask yourself, why do we live in an age of vapid babbling, social media? Why do we live in an age of madness and militarization, with all the old religions being destroyed by force and fire? Why is everybody in America a self-obsessed brat who worships Star Wars? The Millennium Falcon, anybody? Meanwhile, our foreign holdings are policed by hawk-shaped drones, piloted by their operators like they're playing video games. Why is this? Why are we constantly under the all-seeing eye of the NSA, the Eye of Horus, the Eye in the Pyramid? The answer is that we're children. We're babies. We're just slowly growing out of the age of religious domination. This is the game of Horus. So I challenge you, take a look around yourself for the next few days or weeks. When you're on the street, when you're online, look around and just observe what people are doing. Even the people in charge, even the supposedly mature people. What you will see, if you really look closely, is children playing games. Watch the obsession with juvenile diversions, the adolescent sarcasm, the social media nonsense, even the people at war, even the really fucked up people. Take a look, and you'll see the face of Horus. Every one of them, a sovereign if juvenile divine being, playing their own weird games for their own amusement. This, by the way, is the surest footing for the practice of compassion, to see other people as equally divine as you, just playing different games. So this is where we are, right? Mankind is a race of slowly awakening divine children, with all the magical power that people once talked about when they talked about the gods. So why do we still feel powerless? Why do we still feel like we have to go along to get along? We don't. We've already got all the magic we need, more divine power than humans have had at any other time in history. We are divine children at play with the universe. But the question is, what are we going to grow up into? Because right now we're behaving like terrible, awful little fuckers. We're stomping on the planet. We're breaking our toys as we wake up. Our leaders are morons who are trying every last trick in the book to control us, and they still can't do it. They can't even keep the government running over a basic issue like healthcare. But worse than that, we as a culture, like children do, are completely ignoring our impact on the people around us. We're absolutely destroying the environment. We're running out of oil because we insist on having the latest toys and driving Hummers and running on always-on neon civilization because it's fun, because that's our game. We've got things like Fukushima exploding and are seemingly unable to do anything about it. A few days ago, there was a news story that came out that said the air we breathe is now as carcinogenic as secondhand smoke. Right? What the fuck? And again, I ask you, what the fuck? The world is in bad straits right now because we don't understand what's going on, because we're still waiting for somebody else to come fix it. Nobody's gonna come fix it. There's no more Father God, there's no more Mother Goddess, it doesn't exist, it's us. We're in charge, we're responsible now. No one's coming. But because we're so busy amusing ourselves with Facebook and Reddit and whatever, Star Wars or whatever game we're playing, we don't notice it, so we pretend everything's fine. We don't notice our own responsibility. What we're really afraid of is love and responsibility and our own power. That's what we're afraid of. The government's incompetent. They can't do anything to us. We're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of having to take charge, having to grow up. So everything's not fine, right? We have all this power that we're not using, and we've got two serious, serious problems as a civilization right now, in my opinion. First problem is we're artificially inflating the economy with fracking. We're stripping the last reserves of shale oil out of the planet to keep the game going. I mean, at this point, they're just getting the rock out of the ground. There's not even any oil left. They're just taking their strip mining whole sections of land just to get the rock out so they can crush up the rock and get a bit of oil out of it. And because we've done this, then we can pretend the economy is back. But what happens when that runs out? Second problem is that the age of imperialism and slavery, the old Aeon, the patriarchal Aeon, it didn't end, right? It's in its death throes, but it still has its last little hooks in us. It didn't end, it simply became corporatized and more refined. Now, it takes the form of corporate abuse of third world resources, of sweatshops, of military occupation, and of drone policing. In the homeland, just under our noses, it takes the form of private prisons and incarceration of minorities for drug offenses to be converted to legal slave labor for corporations. This is the old Aeon. We don't need this anymore. It takes the form of corporate rape of the environment and the dumping of toxic chemicals in poor minority communities. For the nominally free classes, the disease of the old Aeon takes the form of white-collar indentured servitude, enforced by criminal student loans, political disenfranchisement, and shrinking opportunities for young people. Does that sound familiar? It takes the form of an overpaid, militarized entertainment industry and a distraction-focused internet, which stretches into every aspect of our lives, continually seeking to keep us small, powerless, afraid, scattered, and numb. But for the individual consistence of the system, us, life is still better than it ever has been before, even if our freedom has been traded away, seemingly, because we're still giving it away, because we're still used to the old Aeon. That quality of life depends on simply going along with the plan. Maybe individuals focus on a social issue here or there, or they focus on the token frictions between Republicans and Democrats. But to question the overall plan, to discuss that our oh-so-advanced modern world is an abattoir, a meat machine, this is forbidden. To question the two great sins of our culture, that our quality of life depends on the destruction of the environment and the rape of the global poor, this is forbidden. Even the indentured servants of the American middle class, right, as shackled as we are, stand on the shoulders of the slaves below us. The iPhones, computers, and consumer goods come from sweatshops that drive their workers to suicide. The food comes from corporate plantations, abused migrant workers, and tortured animals. The pharmaceuticals and cosmetics come from toxic, profit-driven black science and animal testing. So, what do we do about this? Sweeping the abuse of the environment under the carpet and the abuse of the poor under the carpet, these are the two great lies, I think. They run through our entire culture and corrupt everything they touch, and they are the last vestiges of the old Aeon, the idea that you could own other people. As far as I can see, there is no easy escape. These are a manifestation of nature in its purest form. And also, in a way, they are a manifestation of Horus, Ra-Hur-Quit, the god of war and destruction, vicious, brutal, red in tooth and claw. Non-egalitarian, non-democratic, non-compassionate, and concerned only with who eats who. Like a hawk who snatches a lizard in the desert and tears into it on a rock. This is reality, and this is nature unveiled. The great advance of Western civilization is not that we've overcome our base nature, but that we have learned to keep our nails clean and our smiles bright. To pretend it isn't happening, to pay others to keep it out of our consciences. To pay others to slaughter and prepare our food. To pay others to fight our wars for energy, and then to take the blame when we get angry at them. for serving our interests, keeping our consciences pure by pretending it was Bush or Cheney or Obama who did the dirty deeds when they were just fulfilling our needs for energy, to pay others to enact the sexualities we're afraid of exploring ourselves, to pay others to entertain us and keep us numb with pharmaceutical concoctions to stave off the demon of self-awareness. It's not them, it's us, and the way out is to acknowledge it, not to revel in it, not to become overwhelmed by it, but to see it, see the lies, don't get guilty, don't get fucked up about it, but see and acknowledge what's happening. Sit with it, understand that no one person can change it, but that minor acts of resistance and choosing higher paths when confronted with the ability to make those choices can cumulatively change everything. Mankind raised itself out of the darkness of prehistory. We've overcome diseases, overcome some of the more outwardly brutal forms of oppression. The Middle Ages weren't that long ago, and consider how far we've come since. The Western ideas of egalitarianism and human rights that were precursors of the dawning of the Aeon of Horus, those are only a few centuries old. How much further can we go, right? New advances in science are occurring at a rate too fast to keep up with. Can we not maintain that catastrophic rate of development and advancement in the field of human dignity and human freedom? We not only can, but we must. Or, as many have told us before, we will destroy ourselves because our capacity for technological wizardry will be our demise if not coupled with the wisdom and focus on basic humanity that will allow us to use our new toys properly. I do not wish to see a world in which the human is discarded for the transhuman. So, Horus, it's time to grow up. And it's my contention that the raw disciplines of magic and spirituality can do that. It's about recognizing who you are, where you are. Magic is discipline. It's about disciplining your body, mind, and spirit to fully become yourself, not something else. And it is a hard ride. There's no easy answers in magic. But the answers you forge are yours to keep. And in a world in which nothing is certain, in which nobody has it figured out, in which all the old models are crumbling, I suspect that there can be no greater investment of time and energy than putting effort into your own spiritual growth and realization. Because nobody can take that from you. It's not wasted time. So, it's the job of a stage magician to produce illusions, but it is the job of the true magician to remove illusions. And why should you practice magic? You should practice magic because we need more people with less illusions. We need more grown-ups in the world. We're becoming an enlightened species, but we're not acting like it yet. So when are we gonna? But when are we gonna say fuck Miley Cyrus, fuck Democrats and Republicans, and fuck Facebook, let's fix poverty and go to motherfucking space? So, thank you. And may all beings attain to peace, freedom, and happiness. And if you have any questions, please ask me, because I'll answer technical questions about magic too if you have them. Anyone? Yes?
How would you suggest spreading the message?
Spreading the message, I think the best way is just to do it yourself. And because the more you do magic, the more you become a conduit. It's not good to it's not like
you don't want to preach.
You don't want to preach, you don't want to proselytize, right? I think the best way is to become a living example of it. And do that in whatever way you're called to. The more you engage in magic, the more you engage in the true will, right? Like it's like not everyone is different. Not everyone is the same. Everyone has a different way in the world, right? So I think it's about fully becoming yourself, fully embodying yourself, and then just radiating.
Yeah,
you know?
Maybe trying to popularize whatever you're doing.
Yeah, or you can start a blog like me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you feel about study groups versus like covens or things like that? You know, I know you don't like degrees and whatever else. You've stated that before in like your own writings and whatever else, but
I think there's room for all of it. It kind of depends on what system you're engaged in. The thing about covens and so forth is you have to be careful with initiatory oaths, because often there's extra stuff thrown in there, and what happens is you get energetically corded in with the other people, which can become a practical problem later on if you grow out of it, essentially. You want to get away from it. It can be a little tricky energetically. So I always kind of caution people to look at the fine print when they join those things. But that being said, you can get a huge amount of value out of doing magic in groups, and in keeping things secret, just because it has more power within your own mind, even if it's not something that's really a secret, I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, the study groups are good too. I mean, but you want to study, and you want to combine that with practice and throw yourself into it and actually doing something.
Or study with a closed circle kind of thing, so you're not like,
Right. Yeah, just watch what you promise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Your critique seems to be really grounded in sort of material science and sort of the basis of the argument for magic. It seems to be based on this sort of very specific historical lineage. That includes a lot of sort of scientific knowledge, whereas it seems like what you're advocating is some sort of like self-actualization, where it's some sort of maybe you even use a Freud quote. But like it's like maybe to borrow another, like stopping the world or something,
Right.
How do you think those correlate? I mean, do you think again, to use the same quote, stopping the world then translates into this sort of material change, or I don't know.
It's a good question, right? Because we got to figure out how these things interact.
Yeah.
Aleister Crowley, I think, nailed it when he said that magic should have the method of science but the aim of religion, which L. Ron Hubbard later stole and turned into Scientology. But that's what it's about. I mean, it's like, I think for me, magic is, you take all the facts of the material world, right? It's like science is constantly updating our knowledge about what's real, right? But magic is how you connect those dots, if that makes sense. It's like how you make, magic is about how you make meaning from what you're given. So we want to use all the latest scientific techniques. We want to figure out what are the newest ways to get into altered states. We want to figure out what are the newest ways to self-actualize, like you said. And we want to take, if you're a magician, you look at everything as a tool, right? Everything can be used to further your own development, growth, whatever, your will, right? So you don't want to leave anything out. It's not about putting magic and science in opposition to each other. It's about taking the magical mindset and saying, what can I use, right? In terms of whether science will ultimately give us a model of consciousness that works, maybe. I'm not sure that totally answers your question.
But isn't sort of even the basic belief in objectivity and truth kind of veering away from this notion of the set out goal of magic you propose?
Well, when you truly get into the magical mindset, nothing is true, everything is permitted, right? And that's a platitude, but the more altered experiences you have and the more magical experiences you have, you realize that nothing is set, everything is up for grabs, everything is malleable, everything can be changed. So I'm not sure it's a quest for truth as much as it is because truth changes, right? It changes constantly. It's about, I don't know, I guess it's about reaching for whatever the highest is for you at that moment and constantly challenging and changing and going for the highest.
Wouldn't that be sort of just the Horus, like sort of total, for Freudian terms, like id-based, just like go for what you desire at any given point? No, because it's not about what you desire. Your desires, you can fulfill your desires with magic for a little bit, but ultimately it doesn't work. It's about aligning with the true will, meaning your reason for incarnating, and that's what magic is for, right? And that may change, but it's about aligning with what you're really supposed to do, and that will usually destroy what you think you're supposed to do. And that's an ongoing dialogue. So it's not about do what you want, it's about do what thou wilt. What are you supposed to do, right? I'm not gonna continue because this seems like we could just get into
right.
a conversation.
No, that's good though, right? I hope that clarifies. So, Anyone? Yeah.
How do you view curses in modern context?
I think they're pointless.
Question in here.
He said, how do I view curses in a modern context? I think they're juvenile and pointless, and they always backfire on the person who did them. Plain and simple. Yeah?
Yes. How could you use the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, the LBRP in daily life in this age?
It's recommended to do it 3 times a day. Crowley says do it, I mean, whatever you want to take, right? You can do it once a day. I mean, you can do it when you wake up in the middle of the day and at night. That may be overkill, maybe twice a day. He describes at one point in one of his books, you want to do it to the point where your aura is, as he describes it, a bubble which, the boundaries of which are like a razor, a soap bubble made of a razor.
Okay, this
Right.
is the Crowley description you're talking about.
This is Crowley's description,
Crowley's,
yeah.
yes.
In general, yeah, you can do it constantly as a grounding, as a centering ritual, as a way to clear out energy. The only thing that I caution with it is if you're constantly banishing, you want to mix that up with invoking, right? Because if you're just banishing, then your world's going to you're constantly like nuking your environment essentially. So you want to pair that with invoking, which is trying to bring new things into your life, fresh energy. You want to clear out the stale old energy and then bring in new fresh energy, right?
When you say invoking, do you mean gods or goddesses or spirit guides or animal totems?
It can be any of that, but there's also a form of the banishing ritual called the lesser invoking ritual of the pentagram, where you simply trace the pentagrams in a different way, and then that invokes the elements. It invokes pure elemental energy. You can banish impure elemental energy from your life and then bring in pure elemental energy. And then there's more complicated rituals as well. But,
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
How do you feel a sense of absurdity as a powerful tool in magic? When I think of the child, I think of the trickster.
That's a great question, right? Because in the tarot, on the Tree of Life, the Fool card in the tarot, right, is actually higher than the Magician. It's the card 0, the Magician is 1, the Fool is 0, and the Fool, the Clown, the Trickster, this is almost the purest form of magic. If you can come into a situation and just rattle things up and fuck things up and cause chaos, you'll always have some type of magical result because you just allowed for chaos to enter the situation. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Magic has such a bad connotation, like worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, how do we bring it worldwide to like a positive? Like our own true magic has nothing to do with magic, but realizing our own true intention, like uniting. Like how can we bring magic universally in a positive way without, the theme?
I think just by being open about it. I've found in my experience that people are fascinated. When I first started out, I thought that I didn't talk about it at all because I thought that people would judge me and they would have that reaction that you just described. I found in my experience that people are much more freaked out when you're like secretive and paranoid about it than if you're open with it. Because people are really fascinated and interested, and if you just kind of explain it in a way that makes sense, then people are usually like, oh, okay, and then they move on to the next thing. But so I think that's one way, just being a good example and putting it out there in a way that makes sense to people. In a way, I mean, magic is it's unfortunate in a way that it's called magic, because really we could call it so many different other things, from Metaphysicism, Western esotericism, meditation, Kabbalistic meditation, I don't know, whatever the fuck you want to call it, right? But I kind of like that it's called magic as well, because I like that it scares people a little bit, because it kind of pushes away people who aren't ready to look under the surface. They're that easily pushed away by the appearance of something, and they're not ready to look under the appearances of the world. So, anyone? Going once, going twice? Okay, well, thank you for listening to me.